reflection. Much effort has been spent over the last number of years on regulatory cooperation. But what have we accomplished to date? Has it been enough? What do we mean by convergence, harmonization, equivalence? Will working in regional or even hemispheric blocks address challenges regulators and countries face? Well, if we look at supply chain integrity, is this a national issue? Is this a regional problem? Is this hemispheric? The chair of APEC rotates amongst the economies annually. In 2011, last year, it was the US that chaired it. This year, it's Russia. Next year, it's Indonesia. And this is just schematic. The colors here are members of APEC. So we see that Chile, Peru, Mexico, US, and Canada, in fact, are members of APEC. And it really does affect much of Asia Pacific. In fact, this region is responsible for almost 50% of the world's economic product, dealing with banking, investment, telecommunications. But the Life Sciences Innovation Forum is particularly relevant to this dialogue, and you'll see why. It was created following endorsement by APEC leaders, actually in Los Cabos, Mexico in 2002. Recognized the importance of life sciences innovation in promoting public health and economic health. The idea here is healthy citizens, healthy economies, and doing so through innovation in life sciences, making good use of investment. And from the outset, harmonization was seen as a prerequisite to fostering innovation. Well, you can imagine if each country has different regulatory requirements, that becomes a detriment to fostering innovation, certainly from the perspective of investment on the part of industry. Now, the Life Sciences Innovation Forum, or the LSIF, is unique in that it doesn't produce harmonized guidances. Rather, it promotes the use of existing international guidances such as ICH. It has some interesting features within APEC. Firstly is the ability to access APEC funds to advance projects, such as workshops or training. Secondly, the voluntary basis for engagement ensures the participation of those economies interested and committed to cooperation. So we're not trying to move 21 economies forward at once. Really, we're saying, if you're interested in this, if this sounds like a good idea, join us, but you need to be committed to this. It's also a tripartite structure with complementary roles for government in the form of regulators, industry, and academia. And this is very, very important to have all major parties involved in this discussion. So, some important developments since the LSIF was formed a decade ago. The LSIF sponsored actually many workshops aimed at promoting international standards and practices. However, efforts, and my apologies here, efforts were not coordinated. So there were generally a series of standalone workshops advanced by different economies because they thought it was important. But it would take place, people would go home, then what? Perhaps the area where this was not the case was around counterfeiting, with the development of an anti-counterfeiting action plan and a series of workshops that built one on the other. But there was a growing recognition that a different approach was necessary to promote regulatory convergence. Discussions in Peru, when Peru chaired APEC in 2002, Lima, Peru, led to the creation of the Regulatory Harmonization Steering Committee, or the RHSC, which I chair, and the APEC Harmonization Center, which is located in Seoul, Korea. And they were launched in June 2009 around a very successful workshop and multi-regional clinical trials that attracted over 600 participants from about 20 different APEC economies. So what is the mandate of the RHSC? It is to promote a more strategic, effective, and sustainable approach to harmonization, now convergence, by proactively identifying and prioritizing projects seen to be of greatest value to regulatory authorities and to industry. To strengthen linkages with harmonization initiatives, training organizations, and other key players to promote complementary actions and most effective use of collective resources. So again, we are positioning ourselves in APEC to say, we are not the generators of technical guidances or standards, but we can play a role. But even promoting the use of this, we need to reach out to other harmonization initiatives, players such as like the World Health Organization, non-profit organizations such as DIA and RAPS and others, to really sustain and push this forward to get the desired results. Products of interest, medical products, originally pharmaceuticals and medical devices, but now this is expanded. So the membership is actually senior representatives from the regulatory authorities of 10 APEC economies, including the US, Mexico, Canada, Russia, actually not Russia at this point, China, etc. So many well-known regulatory authorities, industry representatives, and I'll touch on that again in a moment, and the director of the APEC Harmonization Center. Now, the APEC Harmonization Center is in fact an APEC-wide resource to enhance and sustain regulatory convergence and capacity building. It operates under the authority of the LSIF with the direction from the Regulatory Harmonization Steering Committee and an International Advisory Board. And to date, the APEC Harmonization Center has held about a dozen workshops on topics such as biosimilars, supply chain integrity, a series of workshops on multi-regional clinical trials. And an important feature of this is that they serve as diagnostics of the issues. Recommendations flow from that, come back to the Regulatory Harmonization Steering Committee for consideration. We felt that to guide the work, we needed to develop a strategic framework. So just as Jose Peña will be talking about the strategic framework and plan that is being developed within PANDRA or PLARF, we actually developed such a strategic framework in 2011. So the framework outlines a strategic multi-year approach for achieving greater regulatory convergence by the year 2020. It describes guiding principles and a general multi-step approach to regulatory convergence. It talks about voluntary action. Again, APEC is all about voluntary action, whereby we're saying not every regulatory authority is going to cross the finish line at the same time. We have different realities, different capabilities. However, we're gradually getting closer together, and that's the important thing. It includes the definition that you saw of regulatory convergence, includes appendices for pharmaceuticals and medical devices, and suggested indicators of success. So coming back to measuring success, this becomes very important. And I'm happy to say it was endorsed by senior APEC officials in November of last year. And this is really what it's all about. At the highest level, you have a strategic framework that sets the goals and the timelines for a coordinated approach to promoting convergence. We have established a number of priority work areas from surveys, from diagnostic workshops, and other inputs. And then we are developing projects around these priority work areas. And in fact, for each priority work area, there is a roadmap being developed or has been developed. And each project that we undertake has to be in alignment with the roadmap, which in turn gets us towards the ultimate goals of regulatory convergence. So we're moving away from ad hoc or individual actions to a more strategic and sustainable approach. So, as I mentioned, roadmaps being developed by champion economies for each priority work area. So, to date, we have MHLW, PMDA of Japan, who have actually developed a roadmap on multi-regional clinical trials because they were concerned about the drug lag between North America, Europe, and Japan. Supply chain integrity. This is a very important roadmap that was developed with the leadership of the US FDA, and it has also been completed. We heard Larry talk about good review practices. This is also another area that is under active development with a roadmap and also a series of workshops on good review practices, as well as on combination products led by Chinese Taipei. Korea, KFDA, is developing roadmaps on biotech products and on pharmacovigilance. The biotech started as biosimilars. But then the conversation said, well, you shouldn't be dealing with the child, you need to deal with the parent as well. So now it is broader, and it is dealing with the original offerings of biotechnology, and also looking at what are the requirements for biosimilars. And when I say we're moving beyond simply medical devices and pharmaceuticals, Singapore, looking at advanced therapies, is developing a roadmap on cellular therapies. Now, we realized that we needed to reach out more than we had been. Even 10 economies is good, but there's 21 economies if we're going to promote regulatory convergence in a successful way. So with this in mind, we recently endorsed the formation of a regulatory network. So we have a steering committee, but we have a regulatory network composed of the regulatory authorities of all 21 APEC economies. So members of the network would be able to participate fully in the discussions and projects undertaken by the RHSC. We also have the formation, and this is really exciting, and perhaps the first time this has happened globally, of industry coalitions representing the research-based pharmaceutical sector, the medical devices sector, the generic pharmaceutical sector, biotechnology and product sector, and we have also reserved an additional floating membership to accommodate advanced technologies, because one can be very different from the next. For example, cellular therapy is very different from nanotechnology. And in fact, we have now coalition leaders that are reaching out to all the associations. If we take the research-based pharmaceutical sector, so you have pharma in the US, you have RxMD in Canada, you have similar associations here and elsewhere, and they're forming coalitions amongst all of those associations so that they can have common positions, or at least get the information out within those sectors. So this is actually very important. The other thing that we're doing is, as I mentioned, is reaching out to other harmonization initiatives, organizations. We are represented on the Global Cooperation Group of ICH. We are now the first affiliate organization recognized by INDRF. We will become an official observer of the Canada Network, and we have also established official liaisons with the WHO and the European Medicines Agency, EDQM, USP, etc. And it reflects the position that APEC should act as a catalyst for international action on issues that demand a global approach. The best example here is the roadmap on supply chain integrity. So in summary, international regulatory cooperation has become an essential part of dealing effectively with the challenges of an increasingly complex and global environment. Cooperation should lead to tangible, meaningful results. The time for talk has ended. We really need to get down to concrete actions that benefit us all. Despite challenges faced, some encouraging developments and trends are taking place. Maximum benefit will come from more strategic discussions, planning, and action. And I leave you with a series of questions. Are current regulatory models effective and sustainable in the face of globalization, technology, increased workloads, and growing public expectations? How do regulators move beyond information sharing and good intentions to more effective forms of collaboration? And finally, can regional and international efforts be consolidated or better linked? So, some food for thought, and I would like to thank you for that introduction. It gives me great pleasure to call upon Jose Daniel Peña, who actually